Martin getting started. I knew it.
Oh my gosh.
Dallas, you're muted.
Didn't realize it was going to keep me muted when we came out of that video. Stupid damn StreamYard. Anyways, we're starting this show a little bit differently, guys. It is the weird Black Wednesday episode at 2 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Steve Kurtz in the comment section saying playoff tickets in hand. Guys, that's the big news of the day. Idaho playoff tickets are on sale right now. If you're a season ticket holder, you've probably already locked yours in. But if you are not a season ticket holder, it is time. Get your tickets to the Dome because next weekend, Idaho has a home playoff game in the Kibbe Dome. This is Tubbs at the Club, guys. We're brought to you by Snake River Stampede Whiskey, but we'll tell you a little bit more about that later in the show. Martin and Brian are here. We're talking everything bye week. Guys, this might be one of the first times Idaho wins a bye week. Thoughts?
What do you mean first time? We Idaho already recovered on a bye week earlier this year, but I will second your emotion of stating that. Dude, great news to have Idaho on bye week. Feels pretty good for this to be a low key week for Idaho, and we get to just focus on Thanksgiving and, if you care, who Idaho is going to play next round.
Yeah, you might notice Brian sounds a little bit differently. I'm not sure if the duster made it, but Brian is reporting in a car out in BF nowhere. Pretty light out there, but Brian, thanks for joining us from the road.
Yeah, in the parking lot of Yakima Valley Community College. Why? Because it's empty, and I have all 4 bars of service here. That and my in-laws might live in Yakima.
Well, but that might have something to do with it, I guess. And then we've always got producer Martin hanging out in Moscow. Martin, how's the cold weather of Moscow treating you today?
It's going great. It's quiet in Moscow with all the students gone. It is nice to be back on the show.
We're going to jump right into it, guys. First things first, a little bit of cleanup before we get into What we're going to end up doing by the end of the show is talking a little bit about Nicholls State and Southern Illinois, Idaho's 2 potential opponents for next weekend. But first things first, the big news of the week. Big Sky conference teams have been announced, headlined by Offensive Player of the Year Lan Larison, Defensive Player of the Year Alex Gubner, the running back from UC Davis and the defensive lineman from Montana. Coach of the Year Bobby Houck, unanimous selection there, unfortunately. But when we get into the first rounds, the first teams, Giovanni McCoy named first team quarterback, Anthony Woods first team running back, Hayden Hatton first team, unanimous first team receiver, Marcus Harris first team DB, and first teamer Ricardo Chavez at the kicker. Any thoughts, guys, on the first team? Any issues with the 5 Vandals that have made it there, and anybody that you think should have made it there?
So with first team selections for Idaho, I mean, I'm good with all of them. Giovanni McCoy, he's had a kick-ass year. Also, just with the stylistic changes in the Big Sky, Giovanni McCoy doesn't have Eric Barrier type of numbers, but he's well respected throughout the conference as pretty damn good and a gamer and a tough guy. So I like McCoy at the quarterback pick. Running back is weird, not because Anthony Woods was first team. He should have been. It's just because of, in the same way that quarterback talent is a little bit different right now compared to a couple years ago, running back talent is pretty damn high. So like the number 2 or 3 rusher in the Big Sky, Joby Mallory from Portland State, he didn't even make a team. But that's talent changes year to year. This is just a stylistic kind of waiver riding in the Big Sky. So congrats to Anthony Woods. And then, Hayden Hatton, no brainer. Him and Efton Chisholm the third were both unanimous selections. Correct, Alice? Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And for Idaho, I guess the standout thing is only one defensive player selected for the first team. No, not to step on your toes, Dallas, but no defensive player from Idaho selected for the second team. And broadly, I'm fine with that. If you're going to pick a single guy from the Idaho, top 11 on the defensive side, Marcus Harris is the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. If the defense was going to get anybody on the first team, Marcus Harris is absolutely the guy. You look at the second team, Jermaine Jackson made it to the second team as receiver and punt returner. Chavez made it on as the punter for the second team. And then Sean McCormick named as a special teams player on the second team. You get into the honors, which is the honorable mentions. Some years they do first team, second team, third team. Depends just how the votes are kind of spread out. This year, what they did was the honorable mentions meant you had to have had 3 votes. I think that's changed from time to time, but anybody named to the honorable mention list means you got at least 3 votes for first or second team. On that, there are quite a handful of Idaho defenders. Keyshawn James Newby and Dallas Afalava on the defensive line. Trey Thomas and Exree Alexander as the linebackers. And then Tommy McCormick made it in as a DB. You also had Jermaine Jackson as an honorable mention kick returner. And then rounding it out is Aiden Knappich, second straight time being on the honorable mention list from the offensive line. So all in all, guys, technically, we're talking 15, 16 guys getting named. Obviously, when you're talking Jermaine Jackson made it 3 different times and Chavez made it twice. Not obviously 16 guys, but quite a handful of selections from the Vandals, which you'd expect, again, being the number 4 seed in the nation.
Yeah, and I guess another takeaway to look at is, so just so people are aware, in case you are not, the Big Sky Conference itself does not select their all Big Sky teams. The voters for this are coaches. Mm-hmm. No one else. There's no media input whatsoever. There's no conference input. It is the coaches, A, B, C, the end. No one else is involved. So if you're pissed about a team, just make sure to DM Charlie Reigel. I hear he's the one responsible for getting back to upset fans. The second, I was happy that Jermaine Jackson made second team as a receiver, not just as a punt returner. It's kind of wild to think Jermaine Jackson was the second best punt returner in the league, but hey, Junior Bergen's also a kick-ass punt returner too. So the Big Sky does have a ton of talent at the FCS level. But Jackson making it was kind of the one I was the most hopeful for, because his stats compared to last year they're significantly down. He was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. He's not a 1,000-yard receiver this season, but he contributed in other ways. And also, I mean, it's not exactly his fault that Idaho had more success on the ground this season, in particular early in the season, and that just changed the distribution of receptions. I mean, you even look at Hayden Hatton, who he's having a kick-ass season, but Hayden Hatton didn't really explode until the last 3 or 4 games. Dallas, it took a while, and kind of that was the same cycle as last year. It's just different when he already had that defined role. But so, hey, stoked for Jermaine Jackson. And then what I guess what I look at for Idaho is one, both Montana and Montana State led the conference with 8 selections to the all-conference teams, not honorable mention, the all-conference teams. Idaho had 5. So hey, Idaho right up there with 2 of the top teams in the conference, because Idaho is one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the conference. But when I see that honorable mention list, and I see almost not exclusively, but the majority of Idaho selections should be coming back next year. That's what makes me feel a little more stoked about this list, not really caring that Idaho didn't get a bunch of defensive guys this season, knowing that we've got some young guys who are learning on the fly, and still we have a bye. So, no big concern I have with that overall list itself. And again, as long as the guys can stay here, stoked about the future.
Yeah, Brian, you spoke about the difference in stats for a lot of these guys. Keep in mind, Giovanni McCoy considerably, quote unquote, worse stats this year. Threw for less yards, almost half the amount of touchdowns he did last year. But again, scoring was down across the Big Sky. So keep that in mind if you're wondering, how did Giovanni go from not being first-team quarterback with 27 touchdowns and 2,700 yards to first-team touchdown when he had just over 2,400 yards and only 14 touchdowns? Again, scoring changed a little bit. I want to call it Tom Kendall in the chat. I think not having any guys in the trenches honored shows you that we need to upgrade there. Again, Aiden Knappich getting an honorable mention a second straight year, the only offensive lineman to get an award, less than last year, as last year Bo St. John had some votes. Logan Floyd had some as well. Definitely again, you look at all the skill players that everybody knows, the names in the Vandal offense, obviously all over the awards here, but this is what we know about this team. Offensive line is just not the strength yet. Hopefully it will be. But when you look at the offensive line, Brian, you go through this list and it's Noah Toggy, Weber State. Yeah, he's like 29, but he's probably going to get some NFL cups of coffee. Maybe he'll be able to stick in the NFL. Being an older guy, it's kind of different. Then 2 guys from Montana State, Brandon Casey out of Montana, guy from UC Davis, and then Jackson Slater at Sac State, who I think he might be older than I am because it feels like he's been manning that line for years. You get down into the second team and it does sprinkle into some of the other schools, but it is telling that, again, NAU, Portland State, Cal Poly, Weber State, Montana State, Montana was also the second team. So Montana and Montana State obviously getting multiple guys, Weber State getting multiple guys, but then you have NAU, Portland State, and Cal Poly getting offensive linemen onto the second team. It is quite apparent where Idaho's weakness, quote unquote weakness, again, we're talking a top 4 team. We're not talking like this is a really bad spot on this team. It's, hey, this is the spot of the team that is not quite to the caliber of everything else. It's that offensive line, and it is going to need to grow over time. We expect to see that again. Aiden Knappich, it started as a true freshman last year. His brother is coming into the program. Again, just fresh faces coming into that offensive line, hopefully getting towards that Montana State, Montana level offensive line here in the future.
Oh yeah, I mean, Idaho led the Big Sky in conference play in sacks allowed, and Idaho was the number 53 team in the nation, which is just slightly a little bit above the midline, not that much in allowed tackles for loss. So, look, this isn't a secret. We're stoked for the contributions of the guys who are on the team. We're obviously not trying to shit on anyone, but anyone with a brain would say that is clearly not the relative strength of Idaho. So why in God's name would the first and second team all conference teams be littered with Idaho guys? So
yeah, exactly. Any major pushback on the, again, now that we've gone through the first, second, and honors, anybody from the Vandal side, maybe on the playing field between the lines, anybody that you think should have gotten an honor that maybe didn't?
I mean, not really. Taylor Cash brings up point, also demonstrates how good Anthony Woods is in spite of that, which, hey, that running back is kind of the deepest offensive position right now in the Big Sky, and Anthony Woods getting acknowledged as a first teamer is a big deal. I guess I have more interest in the individual awards, because there are a couple that I think people are probably a little bit more interested in. But I guess, hey, I'll throw it back to you. Do you have any Vandals you feel were omitted?
No, honestly, I feel like this is a pretty solid list. I can't think of anybody that I would have jumped out and started banging the table for, saying this guy should have gotten some votes. I think if Leighton Vining had played all year, I think Leighton Vining should have been on that list. But again, he Didn't get a whole lot of playing time till towards the end of the season, but I thought he looked very impressive as a freshman center. So, gun to my head, I'm guessing in 2023 he's at least going to be honorable mention if he continues to play the way that he does. But that's about the one person I could say, yeah, he played pretty well at the end of the year. Could have seen some votes in there for him, but that's not what happened. So, Brian, you mentioned that you're more interested in the individual awards, so let's kind of go through those real quick, just one at a time before we jump into Nicholls State and Southern Illinois. Offensive Player of the Year, Land Larison didn't play in all games this year. But not a unanimous selection, but obviously the winner of the award. Any thoughts on that? Any pushback? Anybody you wish would have gotten the award?
See, that's the one I think there's the most room for debate about, because you're right. Larison missed multiple games in the conference season. When Larison played, UC Davis was a bit different, and he's like the only running back in the league I would consider wanting. I'm not even talking about age, just on a given year. The only running back in the league I think worth considering wanting on your team above Anthony Woods is Land Larison. That's it. The difficulty I have is saying who is the home run pick to take above Larison, because look, Montana State they were the best offense in the nation, but because of how they spread the ball out on the ground, there isn't any single guy who just jumps out saying, hey, this is the guy who should win the award. Plus, Tommy Mellott was the second team quarterback, and he's an okay quarterback, but anyway, he gets the most touches, so he'd be maybe a guy to talk about, but I would not have voted Tommy Mellott over Land Larison. Hayden Hatton, I think he is a kind of sexy pick because he's Hayden Hatton. I think he's the best offensive player in the Big Sky, and I don't think it's particularly close, but he also took 3 or 4 games to really get rolling. So I just don't think offensively there was a single home run pick, but because Larison didn't get unanimous votes, I would assume the other guy who got votes was Hayden Hatton.
I would assume the same thing, Brian. Hatton's numbers obviously not the same as last year. 985 yards off of 75 receptions and 9 touchdowns. He makes sense to me as the other person that would have gotten votes. I think if Larison doesn't miss 3 games, Larison runs away with this unanimously, and I'm guessing it was closer to unanimous than it was not, because if anybody doesn't necessarily keep up on Big Sky stats, Land Larison had 1,100 yards in 8 games. Anthony Woods had under 1,000 in 10. And again, we're talking about Anthony Woods and Land Larison as the 2 best backs in this conference. The only guy I would ever want to be playing over Woods right now would be Larison. And again, 1,100 yards in 8 games, truly an outstanding year. I still think if he's healthy, I think UC Davis makes the playoffs over Sac State.
Yeah, see, Captain 58 says he could argue for Clifton McDowell from Montana, but he didn't. Same situation, he didn't play every game. And second, he also took a handful of games before he was producing well. So, to me, if Clifton McDowell, and by the way, he won Newcomer of the Year award, so Clifton McDowell was acknowledged. If you give Clifton McDowell the award, you're just saying, hey, the most important offensive player on the best team wins the award. And I don't know. I think there's enough coaches you'd understand wouldn't vote for that. I would certainly hope coaches wouldn't vote for that, because I don't know. I don't like lifetime achievement style awards, even when McDowell was there for 1 year. So I just think the offensive player, like we said, offensive player was not an open and shut case for anyone. Land Larison did at a per game basis probably have the most eye popping stats, and he played on a team that was competing for playoff spot heading into last week of the season.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more with that. We'll circle back to defensive player in the year in just 1 second, but you kind of alluded to it, and I just want to jump right into it. Newcomer of the year, Clifton McDowell, Montana quarterback, obviously came in for Sam Vidlac, and again, just the rotating disaster piece that Montana quarterbacking had been for, honestly, the last handful of years. I know Lucas Johnson had a couple good spikes in there. There's been
Dalton
Snead. Brian, any pushback on Clifton McDowell as newcomer of the year this year?
Not really. I mean, you could probably go through teams and look at transfer players, but Clifton McDowell's fine. It was kind of weird that Montana won every award minus offensive player of the year. But I just think some of these awards, it's easiest to give to an offensive guy just because offensive stats are very easy to explain.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of another offensive newcomer who had the same type of impact as Clifton McDowell, other than like, hey, maybe I don't remember if Shane James was on Idaho State last year. I don't remember him getting a bunch of catches. He was first team all league. So if he was new, I in my car, I can't look this up. So I guess that'd be the only potential example I'd look at.
Yeah, from an offensive standpoint, you're absolutely correct on that. But I think, again, the stats department here pulling up the numbers. And of course, Idaho State's website works worse than most websites, which is saying something. Shadon James had 206 yards in 2022 for Idaho State, so not a newcomer. So you can make a case for it. Like, I think Jakari Larmond had a huge impact on the Idaho defensive line. I don't know that you can necessarily pick a defensive lineman on a team that is obviously run by the quarterback, receivers, and running back like Idaho is. Don't know if you can pick a defensive lineman on a defense that didn't have necessarily like a top 3 or 5 defensive year. Don't know if you can pick a guy like that over, again, Clifton McDowell and what Montana ended up doing with him. So let's circle back, Brian. Defensive player of the year. I want to give a special shout out Mike Culleton in the comment section saying X-Reed going to be a DPOY candidate next year. I fully agree. I think if the coaches have been paying attention to film, which if you've looked at the coaches poll, who actually knows if they're paying attention to film in the way of like voting for things.
You mean the SID poll?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I mean, Brian. I wasn't going to go nuclear with that because again, I've made friends with many SIDs from my previous careers of journalism. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's the SID award. Like, the coaches don't really participate. Anyways, Alex Gubner, defensive lineman for Montana, named defensive player of the year. I, Brian, am personally shocked that it wasn't unanimous, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Gubner is the most disruptive force in the conference. He is a huge reason why Montana had one of the best rushing defenses in the league. He's part of why Montana was able to get to quarterback like they do. He doesn't accrue the stats. He just annihilates offensive line, great gaps for other people. So, Winston Reed from Weber State is probably a guy who got votes, he's a linebacker in the conference. And I don't really think there's much discussion about number 2. I don't think anyone but those two should have received votes.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, Brian. Winston Reed would make sense. I could see maybe a throw-in vote for Maxwell Anderson just because, again, the corner play has been spectacular from him for the last couple of years. But Alex Gubner has been an absolute world ender this year for Montana's defensive line, and you have to specifically game plan around him. Yes, the stats might not pop as much because, again, of where he plays on the defensive line, but not anything that I could ever argue against him as a selection.
As we know from Montana last year, the fact of accruing tackles does not mean it doesn't mean you're good. It sometimes means you're targeted. And that's just not Alex Gubner's role on the team. I would kill for it. I mean, hey, Jakari Larman kicks ass for Idaho. Idaho has some good pieces, but I would kill for a dude like Alex Gubner.
Yep. Hit in the comment section real quick. Jason Mayer saying Winston Reed penalized for playing on a mediocre team. That's absolutely true. I think if Weber State makes the playoffs, this might have been a slightly different vote. But again, that's just kind of what happens. Crewhead 76 saying senior as newcomer, question. Yeah, Clifton McDowell technically did transfer in. I think it was 5th school in 5 years for him. So yeah, technically newcomer to the conference. Brian, go ahead.
He transferred in from Central Arkansas.
Thank you, Central Arkansas. And then Crewhead 76 also asking, what were the amount of carries for Larison versus Woods? Woods, 172 carries, again, 987 yards for 5.7 a carry. Larison, 178 carries, 1,100 yards, 6.2 a carry. And then touchdown numbers very similar. Woods had one more touchdown, 14-13. I do want to give a quick shout out. Captain 58 also saying Munoz at Weber, maybe. Really crazy how down the conference was offensively. I'm assuming that was your pick for newcomer of the year, Captain, which is where I'm going to transition this in. Freshman of the year, Eli Gilman, running back at Montana. Brian, my other thought was Richie Munoz. I think if Richie Munoz plays the whole year, I think Weber makes the playoffs. I think he's the no doubt freshman of the year because, again, I think, yes, Eli Gilman looked great, but it is telling that Montana won every single award here. But again, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, well, Eli Gilman, now he's also a perfect example of a team successfully using the redshirt rule, because Gilman did play last year. He just played in the 4 games, and that was it. Gilman was one of the better running backs in the league. I can't look this up right now, but I believe he was second team all league, right, Dallas, on running back. Okay, Eli Gilman, second team. So if you were going to go a different direction, Richie Munoz, had he started from game 1, to me would be brain dead. Or had Exree Alexander started from game 1, he'd be another guy to look at. Exree or Jacksonek, I'm just leaning towards Exree right now because he received the honorable mention. Jacksonek did not. So I think that Eli Gilman, he gets benefit from 1, being on Montana. 2, he was good. He made the second team. It wasn't an accident. But 3rd, compared to all the other freshmen we talked about, those guys, it took them a little bit of time to establish their role. And Eli Gilman had his role from day 1.
Brian, the one thing I want to mention here, Mike Hilton in the comment section, had Trey Thomas played Sam all year, think he would have been DPOY and or even newcomer of the year. Had 75% of his tackles and big plays after the move, but being young at linebacker did not help Idaho. Again, what you're saying about Exree. If Exree had played like this all season long, to me, he's the no-brainer freshman of the year. But it's just not one of those things when playing time is harder to come by and positions are shifting around. That's just kind of what happens. So, Brian, do you want to tell us all about your favorite holiday drink before we get into the coach of the year?
Oh, this is the easiest discussion ever. No, both unanimous selections, Snake River Stampede or Snake River Stampede 1915 small batch edition. Both are 2 of the best buys you can get at Idaho State liquor stores. The Snake River Stampede, $25.95 a fifth or $45.95 a handle, the only size I buy. The 1915 small batch is aged an extra 2 years. Its cost is $38.95, which, hey, for a higher shelf, nice buy. $38.95 is a pretty good price. Both these whiskeys you can't go wrong no matter which one you get. So if you haven't given Snake River a shot this year, do it for Thanksgiving.
Brian, I'm going to need some shots to get through this one. Unanimous coach of the year. I will remind everyone, as Captain 58 says in the comment section, we all thought Eck was the coach of the year last year, and boy, were we wrong. It was given to Troy Taylor for winning the conference the 3rd year in a row. So with that, Bobby Hauck at Montana named the unanimous coach of the year. Your immediate thoughts, as I know Montana is sort of your second school, Brian, because of your family connections there. Your thoughts on Bobby Hauck, coach of the year?
It's the right call. But Montana had a pretty incredible turnaround after that NAU loss. They won the league. The only loss was when the team hadn't quite established their identity. And if you look at Montana these last 4 weeks compared to like the first 4 of the season, it's just a different team. No one was talking about Montana as being a 2 seed and having a very good shot to make it to Frisco. That's what the dramatic turnaround is. So I kind of feel like picking Bobby Hauck here was a no-brainer. I will say I kind of like that the coaches don't base the award strictly off of, hey, did you expect your team to suck and then they were okay? Because I do think getting a team to win the league is a big deal. Like, hey, Troy Taylor, well, he had no Big Sky losses last year. Like, how do you possibly do better in conference play than losing no games last year? I mean, Bobby Hauck's not far off that, and the team made a dramatic turn in the right direction. #right track. After 4 weeks into the season, so that I'm absolutely okay with this selection.
Burl Trout in the comment section saying, why are we surprised about that? I don't think we are. I think, unfortunately, guys, if I had a vote, it would have been Bobby Hauck. As much as I hate to say it, I would have voted Beavis in as the coach of the year. I think it's unquestionable. And I think you look at the coach of the year award, the Eddie Robinson award, Jason Eck was not named to it. Bobby Hauck was. The reason we brought it up the reason I brought it up the way I did, Mr. Trout, is because there is a considerable portion of the fan base that would make the argument Jason Eck should be the coach of the year. He's taken Idaho to the 4 seed in 2 years. And while I think over the last 2 years, absolutely what Jason Eck has done is one of the best coaching jobs that's happened in college football, not just FCS, but in FBS as well. I think what Eck and his staff have done to turn Idaho's depressingly sad and terrible football program from the malaise of the Petrino days into what it is now, I think is incredible. Jason Mayer, shout out Sheep, love Coach Hauck, and then Kristy Mayer, shout out just barf. That's, but Brian, I can't make an argument for anyone other than Bobby Hauck for what they have done, and then the way they dismantled Montana State and made Montana State look like not the Montana State team of the last 3 years. Honestly, hats off to that guy. I can't stand him. I'm sure I'd love him if he was a Vandal coach. Hate him anywhere else he goes, but hats off. I can't say anybody did a better job than Bobby Hauck this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me, the discussion I would be more interested in is who would be number 2 on your ballot, Dallas. I'd put Jason Ecken as number 2. Now I think for Idaho,
absolutely,
fans, you have to keep in mind for Coach of the Year stuff. Idaho was good last year, so this was a meaningful improvement. But this is not supposed to be like a lifetime achievement award for inheriting Paul Petrino's dumpster fire 2 years ago. Jason Eck did a kick-ass job. There's no other coach I want to be at Idaho than Jason Eck. So, like, if there was some free agent, if we played a really like a waste of time game like we might have done on the show a few years ago about like drafting the coaches, I would still draft Jason Eck first.
Is that CFL drafting, Brian?
Yeah, exactly. But again, like how kind of dramatic turnaround in the right direction. Idaho, though we feel good about Idaho, especially after that last week. If you look at start of the season to end of the season, Idaho was on a downward trajectory the last couple weeks prior to Idaho State. So, hey, if the last couple weeks matter a little bit more in voting than the first couple weeks, there you go. That's why Jason Eck would not have been first in league. Cody Hawkins, you maybe talk about, but I think Idaho State, it's a little bit too easy to get to. It's too easy to count those 2 wins as being like 200. Because again, we just saw in Moscow, Idaho State, though better than last season, because how could they not be? There's still a long way to go in Pocatello before they're talking about playoffs.
Yep, exactly. Brian, you know what else is unanimous? That you can get a great all-inclusive week-long vacation in your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. You could even check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine bitches. Shout out Kristy Mayer. Run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs. And again, like I always say, guys, you can fish the most remote stretches of river in the entire USA. Just bring your clothes and let Colin and HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State, especially if you're looking to get on the right track. Call them now at 406-540-4450. Again, that's 406-540-4450. Again, those O's are zeros, but I say O because I don't like the letter Z. Check them out also at hughesriver.com. Brian, your eyes are closed. You're grimacing at how bad that ad read was.
I was along for the ride like everyone else. I loved it. I especially loved the explanation at the end of your elocution. So thank you.
Before somebody comes back to me and is like, it's not 406, it's 406. Like, yeah, I get that. I know I went to Idaho and reading is hard, but I do understand that. Anyways, guys, moving on. We're over a half hour into the show. We didn't know if we were even going to have a half hour to talk about. We do want to go over one little preview just for the people. We're going to talk a little bit, not a ton. We're going to talk a little bit about Nicholls State and Southern Illinois. Brian, I know you're working off of some physical paper notes today because again, you're reporting in a car from Yakima. I'm going to let you go first because I have this nifty tool called the internet. And if you take my talking points, I can probably find some more much faster than you can.
Okay. So you'll be our crack research team who will tell everyone when the game kicks off this Saturday. But I guess the question I have for, as when I'm watching this game is tail to tape. We're fans. We get to say out loud who we want to win in a way Jason Eck would never say, on a press conference or something like that. So my question is, hey, who do I really want Idaho to beat in this in their second round game? Because I really want Idaho to get a win. I think getting at least one playoff win is a big developmental step for the program. So
Brian, before you jump in, I do want to let everybody know this game is available to watch live ESPN Plus noon Pacific on Saturday the 25th.
Okay. So I'm going to look at Nicholls first because One, Nicholls does have a common opponent with Idaho, Lamar. Nicholls State beat Lamar 37-24, which is not the same blowout score that Idaho beat Lamar. But hey, Lamar finished 6-5 on the year. So relative to being in the Southland Conference, which is one of the weaker conferences in the FCS, Lamar's not a catastrophe. Probably the best win for Nicholls State on the year was beating Incarnate Word 45-32. Incarnate Word was one of a handful of bubble teams whose bubble was burst during the FCS playoff selection show last Saturday. Another common opponent, Nicholls lost week 1, 38-24 to Sacramento State. The team finished the year 6-4, although weirdly, like, they're listed as being 7-0 in conference because they had a forfeit win over Northwestern State. Northwestern State canceled their season after a player was killed. So phase 1, looking at Nicholls, I gotta say I'm not that scared of a team that was relatively competitive to Lamar and lost by 14 to Sacramento State well before Sacramento State kind of imploded. So before hitting like any individual players stuff, Dallas, you might hit, my gut reaction is, having not even talked about Southern Illinois, I'm probably rooting for Nicholls.
Yeah, Brian, I think on paper you look at it, and I think Nicholls is certainly an inferior team to Southern Illinois. But I will say their offense, the Nicholls backs, are terrifying. We know Idaho's struggles with run defense this season. They have 2 running backs. Colin Guggenheim is their power back. He had 792 yards this season, averaged 4.7 yards a carry and 11 touchdowns. Then they have their pass catching back, Jalen Spears, had 709 yards. So again, less than 100-yard difference between the two of them. 6.8 yards a carry for him and 6 touchdowns. He's also 4th in receiving on their team, because when you go and look at this team, Brian, you mentioned that win over Incarnate Word 45-32. They were down 10-0 after the first. They had 9 pass completions the entire game. They ended up taking a 24-13 lead at halftime after being down 10-0, but it was all just by pounding the ball right at Incarnate Word the entire time. Like, again, 9 completions. Their quarterback, Pat McQuaid, completes under 60% of his passes. He has 13 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, just over 2,000 yards. He doesn't run much. He has negative rushing yards on the season when you take the sack numbers out. Like, their offense is entirely built around their 2 running backs. And unfortunately, Brian, they are starting the same offensive line that they did against Sac State in week 1 here at the end of the season. So that is, I will give a caveat. I think as we get into this, I think most people are going to land on Southern Illinois is probably the better football team, but I think Nicholls might be the worst matchup for Idaho.
Okay, can I give you one pause?
Yes.
Now, part of this, there isn't a single answer to this, but a Nicholls team committed to running, and Idaho knows they're going to run. Like, does that scare you more than Montana State, who Idaho did fine with?
No, it doesn't scare me more than Montana State, but I also don't like playing with fire. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
I get what you're saying, because, again, Idaho did do a very good job of shutting down Montana State's rushing attack. And, again, I think you give Coach Eck 2 weeks to prepare for anybody, he's probably going to come out with a winning game plan. But on paper, Southern Illinois, incredible defense, pretty, honestly, bad offense. That also, we're going to get into it, but they're down some starters. Their offense definitely looks a little bit more ripe for the picking. We'll get into Nicholls' defense a little bit, but the Nicholls' offense is certainly scarier to me than SIU's offense at the moment.
Okay. Do you have any points you want to hit on the Nicholls defense before we shift over to SIU?
Yeah. So, again, because we're going to get into SIU's defense and we're going to get into all these things about what makes them a good team. Nicholls' defense, not quite the same. So before we get into SIU's defense, Nicholls State averages under 25. They allow under 25 points a game. They allow mostly through the air. They allow around 250 yards a game. They allow 33% of third down conversions, just 52% of fourth down conversions. They have a defensive end that has 5.5 sacks on the year. But outside of that, they They don't pop off the page statistically. They don't pop a ton in film. They have some guys. They have three different safeties that rotate between the two positions. Each guy ranging between 40 and 60 tackles. So you'll see some pretty good coverage out of the back end because they do actually have quite a few passes defense there, but not on paper a scary defense. SIU is a scary defense on paper and on film, Brian.
Yeah, so Southern Illinois finished 7-4 on the year, 4-4 in the Missouri Valley Football Conference, and going which was seventh. And hey, seventh sounds like not a great number, but of course there's like 1,000 teams who are 5-3, and SIU just finished outside 5-3. So why we're talking about Southern Illinois as kind of the brain dead, this is probably the better of the two teams, is when you look at quality wins. I already hit on Nicholls' quality wins, or their best wins being Lamar, who Idaho beat the shit out of, and Sacramento State, who Idaho handled fine and absolutely face planted towards the end of the year. Well, that was a loss. And Incarnate Word, who did not make the playoffs. Southern Illinois killed Austin Peay. Now, that was early. They won that game 49-23. Austin Peay is a playoff team. Then week 2, SIU, like Idaho, picked up an FBS win. This was for SIU. It was over Northern Illinois, 14-11. Northern Illinois, the home of former Vandal CJ Jordan. But just the fact of picking up an FBS win, no matter how the FBS team finishes, provided it's not UMass, that's a pretty big deal for most for FCS teams, especially if you make the playoffs. A 7-4 SIU team cruising into the playoffs, that FBS win had to matter. Now, I want to look at losses because we're Vandals. So we have the ability to differentiate between a shitty loss to a not very good team versus competitive losses against good teams, and understand that looking good against very good teams, even in a loss, is probably indicative of overall talent. The 4 losses SIU has are all to playoff teams. The 2 worst losses kind of bookended the year. Early in conference play, they lost to Youngstown State 31-3. That was on October 7th. And then the other 2 losses, now these are the scarier losses. SIU lost to South Dakota State, who of course is the number 1 seed in the playoffs, undefeated, 17-10 on October 21st. And I'm bringing the dates just to give reference points for how long this happened, guys, because seasons do evolve. Teams play at different levels. Then lost to South Dakota, the number 3 seed, 14-7. That was on November 4th. The most recent loss, it was a little bit uglier, to North Dakota State, 34-10. That was 2 weeks ago on November 11th. SIU closed the win, beating the shit out of a terrible Indiana State team, 38-9 or something like that. I can't see on my screen. But those 4 losses, 2 of which were very competitive games. I mean, SIU was as close to South Dakota State as essentially any team outside of Montana State this year. So I guess that's what kind of scares me, is the talent to compete with the best teams in the Missouri Valley like that. Now, you guys flagged, the close games were all incredibly lower scoring games. That's what Southern Illinois is going to need this to be. But I guess to temper my expectations, even though those were quality losses, South Dakota State went 3-4 over the last just over half of the season. So that's why they're playing a first round game, is they had a bunch of close games, but they were losses. And their last loss against North Dakota State was an ass kicking where they scored on their first drive, and then it was essentially a bloodbath afterward. But Dallas, you're going to have a little bit more to talk about. I think everyone can tell by the scores I referenced and what we've already intimated at. SIU is a defense first team.
Yeah, Brian, we led with Nicholls State for a reason, because Southern Illinois is absolutely a better football team than Nicholls. Again, crazy things happen. That's why they play the games. But Southern Illinois is legitimately a top 10 defense in points per game, yards per game, rushing yards per game, sacks, and tackles for loss. Those are not top 10 in their conference, which, I mean, that sounds like a top 5 Portland State kind of stat to me. That's top 10 in the NCAA. This is an outstanding team. They allow 17.27 points a game, under 200 passing yards a game, under 100 rushing yards a game. Their third and fourth down percentages are quite fantastic. Again, we also let in because of the Nicholls back choke. But Brian, you mentioned those losses against South Dakota and North Dakota State. I had done some additional research on this. So Southern Illinois over the last 4 years has 11 ranked wins. They had a Power 5 win last year against Northwestern, which nobody cares. Honestly, shut that whole program down. It's an abomination to football. kill it all. I know that they had a recovering year with their new interim coach that's now the permanent coach, but honestly, just kill that whole program. Honestly, shut the whole school down. FBS win, like you said, their defense is what keeps them in games. Their offense is just what can't get it done. South Dakota, they lost 14-7. They put up 332 yards of offense and held South Dakota under 200 yards. They had first and goal from the 5 with 30 seconds left, went 3 yards up the middle, incomplete pass, interception. Now, I mean, interception with 2 seconds left on 4th and goal. Like it's not like a back-breaking interception because obviously the ball just hits the ground and the game is over. North Dakota State, again, that was an uglier loss, 34-10. They trailed 13-10 at halftime and then came out in the second half and went 3 and out 4 times in a row, which is what allowed North Dakota State to just run away with that game because they just pummeled that defense over and over and over and over. And then, like you said, they did beat Indiana State 38-9. But the offense, Brian, for SIU is what is not particularly impressive. Nick Baker, their current quarterback, completes 66% of his passes. He has 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 2,300 yards or so, give or take. He does have legs and can move around, and he owns like all of the records there. But again, nothing that's like screaming out on paper when you watch him, other than he can move around. It's kind of like the Vonnie McCoy thing. He can extend the pocket. Yes, go ahead.
Well, he owns the records because he's in his 6th year of playing there due to COVID plus redshirt rules. So the dude's been a full-time starter for 4 years. So just only want to address the point of like, hey, why does he hold the records? Well, he's played for
the experienced guy that has been running this offense for years and years at this point. Exactly. So he, again, not necessarily screaming stats. Watching him doesn't jump off the page. You get to the running backs, it's all by committee. Their leading rusher, Roe Elliott, missed 5 games with turf toe this year. So they have 3 different running backs that all have 300 yards or more. Their pass catchers, they have 2 guys that are realistically the only 2 guys that really get thrown at. Isaiah Hartrup and Mike Davis III. The 2 of them have 48 and 47 receptions together. So I don't think anybody else on their team has more than 25. So the bulk of the pass catching happens between those 2 guys. Their offensive line lost both of their starting guards against North Dakota State. No word yet if they're going to be healthy for Idaho, but they were not healthy for Indiana State, which not that they really needed to be. That's, again, kind of a bye week in itself. So the offensive line, Brian, dinged up, running back by committee. Again, Roe Elliott is healthy now, so that at least their quote-unquote best player is healthy for them. They have a couple decent pass catchers. The quarterback is serviceable, but it's the defense that is where things happen. They have 8 different guys with multiple sacks. They have their 2 starting defensive ends both have 4+. They have 14 guys that have 2 or more tackles for loss. Each one of their starting linebackers has 50 tackles. They play a very interesting 3-3-5, but the 5 is 3 safeties. Their leading safety, PJ Jules, has 100 tackles on the season, alongside 12 tackles for loss and 10 pass breakups. Like, this is a defense that swarms all over the field. Both of their starting corners, double-digit pass defense. Like, this is a defense that is a national championship quality defense. Their offense just can't get anything done, Brian.
So I think we're ready for the official Tubs of the Club Supreme Court adjudication. Dallas, who do you want to win? Are you more scared of the Nicholls backs or the SIU D-line?
I am more scared of the SIU D-line. And I want to preface what I'm about to say with, I swear, if anybody comes back at me and says, why did you say that, Dallas? We lost in the first round because you said this. I swear I'm going to fucking lose it. I want Nicholls to win this football game. SIU is the better team. Again, I think the Nicholls backs could cause a little bit of a problem in the Kibbe Dome. I think if Nicholls were to win this game, obviously their running backs would be how they beat Idaho. But looking at SIU, watching SIU, I watched a couple games today in preparation to this show. SIU is, again, defensively, national championship caliber defense. Offensively, they can't get anything done. If they go on a magical 4-game stretch where the quarterback doesn't turn it over much, their offense breaks a couple more explosive plays, this is a team that would have an outside shot at a national championship. This is, as Patty Frake says, they shift from 4-2-5 to 3-3-5 to 3-4 constantly, depending on the down and distance matchup. Like, this is a team that rotates quite frequently all over the place, and this is a terrible, terrible defense to line up against. Mike Culleton saying even our coaches are expecting to play SIU. Patty said it. I think it was Patty who said it in the comments. SIU has Idaho listed on their website as their next opponent. Like, they're expecting to win. Most people are expecting SIU to win. Obviously, Nicholls could win, but Brian, that's what I'm hoping for. I would love to see a Nicholls upset this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's just brain dead. If we were picking, which we're not going to, but I'd be picking SIU. So I absolutely want to play Nicholls because I want as easy a path for Idaho as possible. Because I think they're going to be fine no matter what. Because there's matchups Idaho can exploit, which we'll talk about when you know who they're actually playing either way. But hey, we get a root for the bracket we get, guys. So no, Tubbs and Club Supreme Court, it's unanimous. SIU is the worst draw for Idaho than Nicholls. We are all Nicholls fans this Saturday.
I mean, is it unanimous? Martin, do you want to jump in here and tell us, would you prefer Nicholls or Southern Illinois?
I just want Nicholls for the puns alone. Like I could care less who they play.
That's it. Nicholls back it is, guys. Tubbs at the Club, Supreme Court adjourned. 3-0 in favor, rooting for Nicholls State this weekend. Again, you can check that game out on the Saturday, the 25th, noon o'clock Pacific time, if you really want to get some advanced scouting in on Idaho's next opponent. Again, Idaho playing December 2nd, 7 o'clock Pacific time in the Kibbe Dome. Tickets are on sale now. Get your tickets. Any final thoughts, guys?
Well, first, I already got my tickets. So, yeah, Jason X said he's hoping for at least 10,000 people this playoff game. I'm hoping for at least 10,000 people. We got 9,800 on a Thanksgiving weekend game. If we can do that, Idaho can get at least 10 for a playoff game. That's a huge deal. Second, Dallas, we can spend 30 seconds picking Sacramento State at North Dakota, the only Big Sky playoff game.
Martin, Sac State or North Dakota?
I'm going to go to the Fighting Hawks.
Fighting Hawks for Martin. Brian.
Yeah, I'm going North Dakota. Largely it's because Sacramento State, they are just face planting towards the finish line. I mean, they barely 2 weeks ago, Sacramento State barely beat Cal Poly. They won by 11 points, which in Cal Poly, that's essentially a win. And then last week, lost. They were down multiple scores for the majority of the game against UC Davis. They're starting freshman Carson Conklin, who he's a solid true passer, but that team seems like it has some identity issues, that what it needs to happen is for the season to end and some guys to graduate and transfer. So with that said, we go North Dakota.
That's 3 for 3 for North Dakota here, guys. Sac State, again, I think if the Big Sky schedule was 1 week longer and we pushed all of this back 1 week like the FBS does, I don't think Sac State makes the playoffs. I think UC Davis with a win over them in the Causeway Classic, which you assume is, would be being played this week if the season was 1 week longer. I think UC Davis gets in and Sac State doesn't if this season is 1 week longer. That's how close I think it was to Sac State just not even getting in, because they are absolutely not the team that they were to start the year. I don't think they've got a chance. I think it's all lining up to be North Dakota versus South Dakota in the second round. With that said, guys.
Comment section. We've got Ron Lowney, who we love, but I'm going to say he is not exactly counting Eastern Washington's decade plus of being pretty good in the playoffs. Saying you, meaning Idaho, need to show up. The Montana teams have been carrying conference for decades, with only a couple years with Eastern Washington and Weber making noise. I would redo that math on Eastern, Ron, but hey, we want Idaho to show up. We root for Big Sky teams in the playoffs because that helps the rest of the conference. Buford Hornweasel, a new name that I don't remember seeing. Idaho Colonels. He's going to need to explain that one to me.
Nicholls are the Colonels.
Forgive me. Okay. Hey, got it now. Thank you, Dallas. That's why you're here. Ron Lowney saying the Big Sky's reputation is at stake. But hey, Ron, you haven't picked the Sac State game. Come on. Patty picks UND, says Sac is overrated. Capdan says Hawks. That's North Dakota. Sac is famous for going one and done in the playoffs. Steve Kurtz, UND, easy win. Jason Mayer, Sac State reps the Big Sky and pulls out a 21-20 win, then face plants next week. Ron looks like he's co-signing Jason's take. So, hey, most people say in North Dakota, you can tune in. But honestly, I'm paying attention to Nicholls and Southern Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Guys, we're probably going to be hanging out watching this game a little bit. I'm at least going to have it on a screen somewhere. Again, this is just a nice, cheap, easy plug for patreon.com/Tubbs at the Club. less than a cup of coffee a month, guys. If you want to just come hang out with us in our Discord, that's where most of the benefits of the Tubs at the Club Patreon come from. Hang out with us in the Discord, talk Vandal Sports, talk the university, talk honestly anything you want to. But again, football is kind of the bread and butter around here. Football game threads are usually pretty popping off. Going to guess that we're going to have a handful of people that are interested in watching this Nicholls State versus Southern Illinois game. I know I'm going to have it on at least somewhere in my house.
Well, I didn't expect more than a handful. We got 60 members in that chat right now, dudes. So I expect, hey, if you want a reprieve from Thanksgiving stuff, hey, hang out in the Discord and root for Nicholls State.
With that said, guys, go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Go Vandals?